All right, moving on to our next session, which is more on the other uses of SFDs and how people, organizations have used them in what we would say a bit more unconventional way. I'd like to call upon my next speaker, Kim Anderson from SEI. So he's a native boy.
Thank you.
Please,
Thanks.
Kim. Yeah.
Okay. So I have to get this going again. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, I'm Kim Anderson from SEI, where you are at now. I'm leading the Stockholm Environmental Institute initiative on sustainable sanitation. And today I'm going to talk about the work that is actually inspired by the SFDs. And it's about resource value mapping and seeing the potential resource recovery for productive sanitation in urban areas. So let's see, where do I go down? With that one? Yep. So I'm going to start with this shift we have now from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, and focus on the 6.3, which I think is really important. Of course, the 6.2 and all the others are important, but from a resource management point of view, we're starting to talk about, which were not in the MDG, improve water quality by reducing pollution, halving the proportion of untreated wastewater, and increasing recycling and safe reuse globally. So this is starting to get interesting, I think. So if we look at the MDGs, a lot focus on like the facilities, the access to sanitation, but then with the SDG, we can actually, we will take us to treatment, hopefully. But if we do it well, we can go all the way to maybe resource recovery and reuse as well. So, and also considering that the sanitation waste is one of many waste streams that we could potentially make use of. So looking at the urban challenges, many people may know that, but just focusing on cities, for example, an urban area, then about 700 million people lack improved sanitation around the world. About 80 million of those still practicing open defecation in the urban areas. So why think resources, actually cities, they really need to start to considering this. They are a major resource consumer. 75 to 80% of all natural resources are consumed in cities or urban areas, I would say. 80% of supplied energy, about 50% of the waste emissions from urban areas, and about 75% of all the the greenhouse gas emissions. But that's the state today. But we also see an increase because the population is increasing. For example, in developing countries, it's supposed to double from 2000 to 2030, the population in urban areas. Already from 2000 to 2015, it raised from 2.8 to 3.9 billion. So it's quite a fast increase of the urban population. So of course that will have a further pressure on the resources as well. Then we have global water demand as an example, which is estimated to increase by 55% to 2050. And on top of all this, climate change impacts with droughts, floods, that directly or indirectly will affect also urban areas. So, as I said, we were inspired by the SFDs. This is the Dakar. We have just remade the diagram a little bit because we want to do an exercise after this. But it's based on the SFD for Dakar, this one, and here we have identified the waste, the sanitation waste streams, and we thought, hey, this is really a lot of resources that we are wasting. Why don't we take that a step further and see what's the potential of those resources and do something productive of those? So that was kind of the start of the initiative. So that was like the initial idea for a new tool, a resource value mapping tool. So what we want to do in this diagram, want to show that for example, for what do we really talk about when we talk about waste flows in the urban context, and try to map that as resources. So actually we are talking about energy, we're talking about nutrients, organic matter, water, and maybe other valuable minerals, for example. And there are actually a reuse potential using these resources. So then, go back again. So then we did this with the Dakar case. We started to calculate what if we do something good with all this waste that you saw. The earlier one was red and they're going dumped in nature or leaking out. If we start to really have a good collection, more or less citywide, we started with the on-site systems. We didn't touch, for this exercise, we didn't touch the sewage system at this point. So we collect and we process it in an aerobic digesters and make biogas. What's the potential of that? Maybe we could have some kind of urine separation, simple urinals for men, for example, or even female. And what's the potential then on the productive side? So actually, even when we discounting for the collection service that this would require, we could see that the energy output would be more or less equivalent to 16,000 kilometers of bus transport per day. So it actually could support quite a good, a more efficient and renewable energy bus system in the town. When it comes to reuse in agriculture, with the nutrients coming out of the digesters and from urine, I should say also that it's also other organic waste collected from households. So that could more or less support the production of 50 hectares of rice, or more or less 200,000 of tons of rice, which is more or less 1/4 of the import of rice to Senegal, which is an important amount. So what do we want to do with our tool? We really want to have an integrated resource management for cities, so visualization of what are the resources in the waste, so we can get other actors into the discussion around the table, not just the sanitation, water sanitation people, the users that we target, policymakers, planners, but of course the managers in water sanitation and waste, entrepreneurs, investors, development practitioners, and of course, we want to, these are the primary users, but of course, we want to get to the agricultural side and to the energy side as well. So some key initial features to estimate the resources in these flow streams, the waste flow streams, and what are the quantities of the reuse products that we can produce, what are the potential revenues in these, and compare different reuse options. So when I was on parental leave, then we had a really excellent student, Daniel De Viva, who made his master thesis making a first initial development of the tool. So in testing it in Kampala, so this is more or less what you see in this diagram is the input of that tool as it looks today. So you can put in different scenarios. So he used 2 scenarios, which is the current daily collection of waste for fecal sludge, for sewage sludge, and also organic solid waste in Kampala. And also looked at the potential if all people in the town would have sanitation systems and have collections, then we could reach these values on the right on the scenario 2. So some of the results. So if we look at the revenue, I should say also the resource recovery options we looked at were biogas, it was solid fuels, it was black soldier flies, and compost fertilizer. Partly because these are techniques that at some scale is being used in the area. And for the revenues, we could see that the solid fuel, processing it, for example, as a briquette would give good revenues. If we look at the nutrient content, then the solid fuel, the most nutrients will go up, and it will be really hard to capture them in a good way in the ash, so that will be very close to zero, while the digested material could be reused, and also the material from the compost and the black soldier fly. And when we look at the energy content, then the solid fuel is really high, and of course the biogas. And the interesting thing is, as a solid combustion, if we looked at really the potential value, then we saw that they could almost cover the whole city's what they used in firewood today. So actually contributing quite a lot to a more sustainable energy system for the city and reduce forest loss. So what's the next steps? We want to expand on what the tool can do, what waste streams. As you saw, we haven't included the wastewater yet, but of course there is a potential for reuse in irrigation. Animal manure we could add, and we can also have more resource recovery options, of course. And also see what we actually are measuring. We need to look at the cost side, I guess, as well. That's the first thing that city planners and managers will ask for. What does it cost to do this, to implement these technologies, resource recovery schemes? We also, today it's been developed in Excel. We want to migrate the tool into a better tool or platform. It is more visually interesting and intuitive for the users. And do cases and validate the tool. In a participatory process, so you actually gain kind of capacity building at the same time when you do it, and awareness. And then look at potential integration with other tools. And we would really like to see other partners involved in this, and co-funding. So I think more or less my time is out. Just thanks, and also say that we have a book on sanitation, wastewater management, and sustainability. So you talked about a bit about conflict with sanitation and the wastewater. So we've tried to capture this in a new book, which is released on Monday in Water Week. So, yeah, thank you.
Kim. Any questions directed to Kim?
Hi, this is Linda from Sondek EOVAG. I just had a quick question about how, it's a bit more of a technical question about how you look at the costs. Are you looking at dealing with existing fecal sludge infrastructures in a city, or are you considering a hypothetical example where things are how you would like them to be? And are you looking at the cost of the resource recovery, or are you also looking at the cost of different treatment technologies?
Easy question. We're not looking at the cost yet. So that's the next step. Just looking at the revenues. Okay. So it's what the value in it. But then the next step is to really look at what's the cost to produce this, and I guess the alternative cost of not doing. So we should actually compare it to the cost for the society as things are today as well, I guess, if we do that correctly, like really look at the cost benefit analysis. So I guess that's the next step. So we haven't at all looked at the cost side.
Okay, so revenue is like intrinsic values, like electricity, or
that's actually monetary value of the resources with the prices in Kampala today.
We have a method to do that. I can share.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks.
Any more questions? Yes, please.
So I'm Cecile, WASH consultant. Yeah. You talk about like a matrix and Excel sheets. So it seems you have a very quantitative methodology. What about the qualitative aspect, which is the capacity of the small enterprises to do this, the willingness, the adaptation of the infrastructure to do this, etc., etc. The context actually, and the enabling environment.
Yeah, I guess as it is now, it is like Excel sheet, and it's based on a lot of input value. But the idea is to make the tool as simple as possible. So if you don't have values, it is based on scientific research to fill the gaps. So you can actually start with a city without knowing too much, and then the more you know about your city, for example, based on SFD data, for example, then you can populate it with more. And I guess then you need to know more about how to do it, be a bit more of a technician. But the idea is to get going quite easily. And the idea is to have really good output material, so you can discuss this with practitioners, with non-technical persons. So I guess that will also be like the next step. How can we present this in a good way so we can communicate with communities? Because I mean, and that's also, I think, for the future. Now we kind of have some basic what do you call it, scenarios. But I guess in a city, and in, for example, Africa, then we probably will want to continue with decentralized solutions. So I guess the tool also has to adapt to that, to have maybe one scenario, but with 5 cases under that, like 5 different solutions under that. So I guess that's something we have to really take into the next phase of the development.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Barbara first, and then
I'm just going to make a very quick observation. That's a great presentation. Thanks, Kim. And just to say again, I think it's important to see these as steps along the chain. So if you're in a city where you've never had this conversation, I think it's quite good, as you are doing, to have a fairly sort of almost, you could say, one-dimensional analysis with some understandable data. You know, this represents a quarter of your rice imports to start the conversation. If you then get interest, I think that's then the time to go to the next step and say, well, how are we actually going to do that? So I would urge you to sort of feel quite positive about the fact that it's not a complete story, but it's a way of starting the conversation, and it's such a nice, clear representation. I think it's great.
And maybe one should think of that, maybe even when we develop it further, maybe one should have this kind of step, a first step where you just screen, so you actually can start to discuss things, and then in the next, you're more in a participatory way, you start to involve more people, and then you can start to populate more, etc. So yeah. Thanks.
Hi, Kim.
Yeah,
if you're looking at further steps, then I think following up Linda's question, you also need to look at markets. Where is the market for? Because in Indian case, I mean, I think all the solid waste in Indian cities are supposed to be composted. Cities are, you know, they have huge piles of compost. There is no market. People are not buying it. There is nobody coming forward. So you really will need to look at what are
demand side for the
on
resources.
the demand side, exactly.
Definitely. Thanks.
But I think you know, and Linda pointed it out, in Kampala you're lucky that research in parallel has been done. So there are good chances that you hit the nail.
Yeah,
but it's a model.
Yeah. So I guess that will be challenges where we go elsewhere. No, in Kampala there have happened quite a lot. No, so yeah. Okay.
if there are no further questions, I would like to call upon the next speaker.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Kim.
Thanks.
Our next presenter is Astrid Michels. Astrid is based in Thailand, working for GIZ, and she is going to present a case study from Thailand that demonstrates how SFDs have been used in conjunction with another tool that they have developed, the energy and carbon assessment and monitoring tool. Astrid, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Astrid Michels. I'm with the GIZ. I'm actually not based in Thailand. I'm based in Germany, but we are implementing in Thailand. And I'm going to present you a story we're coming here using the SFDs from a little bit of a different angle, and it is the climate. We're coming from the climate change agenda angle. The program that I'm leading is a global program, and it's a joint initiative between the GIZ and the International Water Association. It's implemented on behalf of the German Federal Ministry of Natural Resources. We're working in 4 countries, in Thailand, Jordan, Peru, and Mexico. And the overall objective is to reduce the emissions through greenhouse gas reducing measures in urban water systems, in utilities, so to reduce the carbon footprint. So it actually has a really nice link to the presentation that we heard before. Why do we do this? What is the rationale for this? Well, climate change is water change. Climate change is affecting our waters. We've heard before that water availability is going to be reduced. I think the number that Kim had shown you was 55% in 2050, while at the same time, the demand is going to increase. Utilities are energy intensive because utilities, water and wastewater services, need energy to produce, to extract the water, to transport the water, to treat the water, to collect the wastewater, treat wastewater, and then discharge it into rivers cleanly. So we're using as our concept the urban water cycle, a cycle, because we're looking at closing loops. When we're looking at the national level, energy intensity of water and wastewater services in some countries can be up to 15%. This is true for Jordan, for example, a country with huge water scarcity, diminishing aquifers, lots of energy to transport the water. Looking at the municipal level and at city level, the intensity that is being used, energy intensity can be up to 40% of the municipal energy consumption. On a global level, estimates around the water sector's contribution to mitigation to greenhouse gases is up to 5-6% of global emissions can be attributed to the water sector. So there is a need to reduce emissions while maintaining or improving the performance of utilities. As I mentioned before, we're using the urban water cycle. We're using a systems approach. We're looking at water supply and wastewater. In Jordan, actually, we're also looking at water efficiency and closing loops, so reusing water. And we're looking at different stages within this urban water cycle. And I'm just going to show you briefly the emissions that we are actually considering. And you see here, the orange flashes are indicating processes where electricity is needed for certain processes, and emissions are related to this energy use. In addition to this, we have to remind ourselves, so the little cloud is showing GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, that are actually in wastewater itself, because wastewater is a huge source of methane and nitrous oxide. And I want to remind us in this context that methane and nitrous oxide are emissions that have a much, much higher global warming potential than CO2, 38 times higher for methane and approximately 300 times higher for nitrous oxide. We're also looking at water loss reduction. Why water loss reduction? Well, in many countries, water losses are up to 50%. Reducing water losses means less energy has to be used to transport water. So we are working, as I mentioned before, in 4 countries. I'm going to focus for the rest of the presentation on Thailand. What I want to indicate here is that in all three other countries, we're actually looking at the complete cycle, water supply and wastewater. In Thailand, we're only focusing on the wastewater system. And this is due to a fragmented water sector in Thailand where the responsibilities for water and wastewater are separated. Climate change is affecting Thailand's water sector through extreme events causing droughts and floods. Thailand is an agriculture-based country, so lots of water is actually needed for agriculture. Extreme events are affecting, climate change is affecting water quality too through erosion and severe impacts, and there are severe impacts on human society and the environment. In terms of the costs, intensity of the energy use for utilities is up to 40%. The town that we're looking at is Chiang Mai. Chiang Mai is the second largest town in Thailand, 150,000 inhabitants, and it's a tourist destination. Wastewater in Chiang Mai, or wastewater treatment in Chiang Mai, is impacting or is impaired and is impacting the quality of the groundwater and surface water through fecal contamination, bacterial contamination. Very briefly, the system, septic tanks connected through sewers with a wastewater treatment plant, an aerated lagoon. The influent is very low, less than 10% of the capacity is being used, and very low organic load. Now I'm coming to the tool we have. Part of our project is to develop a tool for GHG accounting. This is a free tool. Similar experiences as Kim has mentioned before. We started with a spreadsheet. Now it's a tool that is free available. The objective is to reduce emissions and costs, to have an idea about the GHG, about the carbon footprint, but also to indicate for the utilities areas where they can improve, so they can optimize, and then they're able to monitor the progress. These are the examples, the results for Chiang Mai. And what I'm going to point out here is, so you see a pie chart, and those are the different percentages of the emissions. And the purple and the pink is indicating the emissions, it's almost 90%, that are actually attributed to untreated wastewater. So it is collected wastewater, but it is untreated because it never reaches the wastewater treatment. And approximately only 10% are actually related to the energy intensity. I'm going to skip this. The tool itself tells us also about the service level. I'm not sure if I used the proper language here, but what we're calling service level is looking at how many people are actually benefiting from a treatment. So it indicates here that is very little, 5 to 10% of the population actually receives treatment to their wastewater. It also indicates where improvement has to be done in terms of when we're looking at the system itself. So in this case, it would be here, the 53%, which is a certain pumping station. But I'm going to skip this now. From this analysis, we know that there are key priorities. One is energy efficiency, the other one is reduction of leakage, repairment of infrastructure. But really what is needed is stakeholder engagement, because the partner that we're working with, the Wastewater Management Authority, is responsible for the management of the utility. But repairment of infrastructure, taking care of fecal sludge is the responsibility of the city. So this is what then led us to the sheet flow diagram. And here I'm showing you the sheet flow diagram for Chiang Mai. And what I want to point out here is just the numbers. So 29% is managed safely, 71% is managed unsafely. Again, we've heard the discussion, it's not about the percentages, it is about the red and the green, and it is about talking to the stakeholders and the decision makers who usually don't have a huge, not necessarily have the technical background, but they need a visualization to understand where their role could be and how the problem could best be tackled, and come up with a joint action plan. So we have discussed this with our partner, and our next steps are to actually have the workshop in Chiang Mai with the key stakeholders such as the city, the Ministry of Interior, and the Wastewater Management Authority. At the same time, we're working on upscaling our approach, and we're also working on the enabling environment, working on policies, capacities, and financing mechanisms to mainstream the approach, to include a strategy for emission reduction and for low carbon, climate resilient water services. And I think my time is over, and I want to thank you. And yeah, looking forward to hear your questions.
Any questions? I think it's time for a coffee break. Yes, Michael.
I just want to ask a question just so that you don't go away thinking we weren't interested. But that was great. It's great. And I like all these different angles that are coming at this. It's great. And it's helping do what Barbara said. It's helping us, depending on where your city is. I mean, these are really important issues that we work with a number of utilities at the World Bank, and this would be a great lens to engage them with.
Mm-hmm.
Do I get it right? You identified the problem and then you needed a tool to get people to talk to each other?
Exactly, because the problem itself cannot just be solved by the utility itself. There is no point in starting with energy efficiency measures if we don't actually, tackle the, repairing pipes and tackling actually the deficiency in the treatment in the sewerage system.
Yes, there's another question.
I find it interesting that so the same diagram is used on different angles, and I think a powerful tool to trigger the interest of the decision makers and push to action would be also to have a mathematical formula that would transform this into amounts and monetary, like how much does it cost to the country, or what could be not only the potential for recovery, but also the economic potential of each of the flow.
Yeah, we actually have that we're looking at, monetary values, but I think it would have been too far to show that. For me, it was important to show the story that we're actually starting with a very technical way, very complex system, and we actually need then a simplification, a tool to simplify it. Plus, we're starting from the angle of the utilities, and we need to reach out to a larger stakeholder group.
Great. If there are no further questions, I'll ask Kim to come on stage and we could kick off another round of discussions. Yes? I would like to start with, we are talking about institution and institutional alignment. I'll just get this off. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I mean, Kim, wonderful tool, really liked it. Would like to know how you would like to use this in actually the next steps. For example, I mean, you're talking about different areas of resource recovery. There were the worms. You had charcoal briquettes, X, Y, Z. But all of this are they fall in different brackets with regards to institutions. Yeah? And how do you get all of this together? I mean, if you make that tool, and probably you're pointing at stakeholder involvement within this.
And, I would say that I think that's the idea with the tool, actually, to show that there are potential for resource recovery, showing that it can be in different fields. It can be in the energy, it can be in the agricultural side, other reuse, water reuse for even drinking purposes, but actually to see that this is resources and we need to be a lot of people discussing this actually. So I think that's the idea to get where you are now, like having a tool that we can actually gather a lot of stakeholders around. So I think it's our like aim to get there. Yeah.
Okay. But institutionally it is very I don't know, I'm a born pessimist, so sorry about that. but institutionally it's extremely difficult to get all these people on board at the same time.
And I think that's also, just to say that, I think therefore you have to have a really visual tool you have to really capture some important decision makers that, for example, a mayor of a city that really likes the idea, and if you get a really important person on board, then I think you can do a lot. If he starts to say that this is interesting and starts to invite different divisions in the city or departments, then I think things can really happen. But if you can't sell the idea to the decision makers, it's going to be hard to work from bottom up. I think it would be nice to have like the vision of the city, I think, to make some progress. Yeah.
Astrid, you want to?
I think from our experiences, like it depends on the country. Like in Jordan, of course, there is a huge interest in reusing water. Like looking at Peru, for example, there is a huge interest in reusing nutrients from sludge. Well, you have to work on the other side on the standards and on the on guidelines and political framework, which we're also doing. But I think and on risk communication, of course, too. But I think, actually, I do think there is a huge market, and I think this is where we're going towards to resource recovery, like recovering carbon, recovering energy, recovering nutrients, and reusing the water for the right purposes. And in Mexico, too, we have the experiences that, the treated water is being used by the industry and in agriculture.
Yes.
And a couple of points. First, I like the idea you are saying of convincing local stakeholders. One thing that we find that's very useful and very important is to have good examples to share. Because if there is really so much potential, are there any cities in the world that have done? And if they have done, or countries, properly well documented cases are extremely important. And maybe Susanna can help in this. But this is going to be critical in really convincing. I don't think just diagrams and results, numbers will really convince. So that story is critical. The second point is related back, and you just now made a reference to the issues of guidelines and things like that. But what is critical is also the kind of legislation that is present, the current laws, whether they permit or not. Some of these resources that are recovered, where is it going to be used and how is that going to be marketed? Those issues, for example, in one of the cities where we are working, there was great hesitancy by people for people to use compost from sludge, fecal sludge especially, in their agriculture practices, because they actually export, and the EU regulations apparently do not allow import of products that are developed using such materials. So such kind of regulations and all is much wider kind of agenda that will have to be looked at. In India, there is great subsidies that is being provided to chemical fertilizers, and that makes it very difficult to market organic substitutes. These kind of aspects would also become, to our experience, very, very critical. So one is good case studies where things have been done, have worked, and second is addressing these other issues.
Yeah. Right. I think it's a really good suggestion now, and we have thought about that also when we choose case studies in the future development of the tool. It's really important to find, even if it's not very large scale, but at least at some scale there are some resource recovery schemes going on, so we can actually build it on things that are functioning, where there are experience about the cost side, the revenue side. Maybe there are some small markets on the nutrient recovery So I think it's really important for then selling the tool to the next city that we actually base this on real experiences that are out there. And so, yeah, I agree. John, thanks.
Hi, everyone. John Sauer from PSI. Astrid, you really just burst my bubble. Here I am thinking Thailand was the one success story we could point to in the sanitation sector. I mean, I'm sure we still can on many fronts, but wow, I'm so depressed now. No, but I liked your point about utilities can't do this alone. I'd like to hear your perspective on like who else does it involve, and what's it going to take to sort of get this last mile. I mean, there is a lot of progress, and now it's just kind of getting to the finish line, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I think what's new to our approach is that we're bringing in GHG accounting. So in a way, we're combining the SDG and climate agenda, and there is a way to also get into climate financing. I also think the approach is, this is not just about mitigation, it's also about adaptation. Your point about stakeholders, I think that is crucial. I think it is not just important to have to look at the public stakeholders like city mayors, representatives of the specific ministries. It's also important to work with the end consumer. And this is where I actually like, the e-governance, work with people, because we can work on, I'm talking now from the emission side, from reducing, like we have to work from the consumer side in our emerging countries that we're working on in terms of being more aware on our water use. I'm not sure if I answered your question, or you. Private sector too, but I'm sure you were thinking about private engagement of private sector. Yeah. Yes, and I do think, and yes, and this is. Those are areas like in terms of ESCO models, what we're also looking at, what kind of private sector involvement can we have to have actually investment into utilities to bring them up in terms of efficiency and performance.
Great, Linda.
I had not so much a question, but just a discussion point to just get your feedback too. Like at Sandek, we also advocate for resource recovery whenever possible. And one reason is also that I always hope that the treatment plant operator will operate the treatment plant better if they're meeting a customer demand. So it's not only about cost recovery, but also just sustainability in general. And I also advocate that you need to, when possible, pick the resource recovery first, because then you can design your treatment technology to meet that goal. And I know you know that, and that's clear to you, but it's amazing how many people don't think about that. And the third point is that we did partner with economists, just a little self-promotion. We also have a document that's coming out this week to really look at how can you actually put a market value on resource recovery products. And because I'm an engineer, I didn't have a quantitative way to do that. So we partnered with experts in economy and business models, just as one tool to put in the whole toolbox to put a number on that for people.
I think they're really useful points, and I would say that I hope that this like resource mining will like help be a new motivation also for expanding the sanitation. So actually, that if we're starting to really look for the resources, then the city wants to also expand, invest more in sanitation, and maybe the other sectors as well are willing to invest in sanitation, which is not happening today. So that's. I guess that's a motivation. So.
Anna, please.
Astrid, just curious, you said you used the tool to bring stakeholders together. Did it work?
We're going it will work.
It will work.
We have presented it to our partner when they were in Germany, and there is a plan to have it in September to roll out a workshop in Chiang Mai itself, and then to discuss the next steps with the stakeholders. So it's not yet.
And then there's as well sort of the Weg ist das Ziel. The process is the important thing. You show the result. Maybe to come to that result together with the stakeholders will be an important exercise.
To start the discussion on responsibilities, roles, and next steps.
I think if there are no further questions, I will close the session. And I'm sure we are all dying for a coffee. So I am, certainly. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.